So Dual Universe is currently in a beta stage, scrambling to figure out how to develop itself with the economic challenges in the company, as well as sort out the community involvement. In this series, I invite everyone who is involved in this involvement to politely put down their pitchforks, grab a seat, and take a listen. Oh, and if you haven't watched this video, you should. We apply the postulates in this one. Starting with a few assumptions, we'll assume this is in a world where the first-time user experience is literally a resurrection node at a market, and that you are given nothing but your tools upon spawning. It'll help us flesh out this aspect of the game much easier, especially to satisfy Axiom 5's independence requirement. To add another assumption, the skill level of the player is irrelevant, such that what we suggest should not attempt to be simplified for the sake of understanding. This should help us be invariant to skill level. There can always be tutorials anyways in case they get stuck. The first thing they will notice is how the player moves and interacts with the general environment. It is certainly neither realistic nor immersive. First, there's a bug where the character controller does not recognize when there is a dip in the surface it's on, which can be especially atmosphere shattering when you just start floating. Additionally, sometimes when landing, the character will repeatedly land and re-land, which is extremely obnoxious to deal with. The other part they will notice is the 3 speeds the player can cruise at: 7 km per hour walking, 21 km per hour running, and 54 km per hour jetpack sprinting. Wait a minute. Why is the fastest speed over 2.54 times faster than running, and also 7.7 times faster than walking? If you remember the video I did on Minecraft, you will know the issue caused by this power creep is severe, especially on methods of transport as echoed by Axiom 3. In the case of Dual Universe, however, it begs the question, why would I walk or run when instead I could just sprint everywhere? You wouldn't, is the answer. A severe majority of the time, unless you're specifically trying to be immersed in the game's small details, you're not going to. The implications of the speed up is more fundamental than immersion, however, it does not mean it's not important to preserve it. To prove my point, can you tell what the fine details of the planet's surface is when I'm doing this? If you can, you're probably lying to yourself, however, if somehow you aren't, you definitely have 30-30 vision. What I'm getting at though is that the scale of the universe changes wildly depending on the speed of the avatar. If the player walks fast, then hills and mountains feel like bumps. The inverse is also true, but I don't think anyone complained that DU planets are too large. Probably someone. A good example of this is how in VR games and experiences, the player is limited in freedom of movement and their entire eyes are filled with that virtual world, such that finer details are required and obtained. What I'm not saying is that DU should have VR, however it'd be cool at some point. What I'm trying to get at is how the finer details are found much more nicely when you spend more space and time actually looking at the game world. From the immersion perspective, it totally makes sense that we can slow down the player's movement to allow them to take in the hard work from the art team and to breathe some alien air. However, there are a few gameplay benefits from the game designer side of things. It's very hard to put in the finer details for the player to mess around with inside of a game loop if the player is able to just blast through it with minimal effort. The early game is just this, primarily because the avatar moves incredibly fast. By slowing down the speed, we can add nuances to this interaction as the slow resource gathering via rocks on the surface and the creation of a hover vessel to do this task more effectively. To flesh out the player's sprint mechanic, first I'd remove the jetpack sprint entirely. This feature is obviously a stopover for an incomplete game. In its place, I'd like to increase the base run speed to 24 km per hour and 36 km per hour max. The slight improvement is nice to have, especially with what I'm about to say. Create a stamina bar that lasts for 30 seconds and recharge it by 0.5 seconds per second. Should the bar go below 5 seconds in capacity, the player will become exhausted and recharge at half rate, 0.25 seconds per second, until it hits half again. If the bar runs out completely, it's unusable until it hits half again with the slowed recharge rate. A cool high breathing and heavy heartbeat sound would be cool to see, the former when exhausted and the latter when out of stamina. Additionally, when the player has mass in their inventory, this will affect the rate at which the stamina decreases from the bar. The formula for this is simply the base rate divided by the player's mass in kilograms multiplied by 10. You can see the expression on screen. The reason for this is to encourage players to use vehicles such as hover vessels in order to transport cargo instead of sprinting literally everywhere. Furthermore, considering the jetpack sprint is being removed, how about an actual jetpack? The double jump jetpack mechanic will be replaced with being able to use your space jetpack but in planetary atmospheres, and it would work like the following. The jetpack will control similar to Iron Man, where the base maximum speed is 160 km an hour with a base acceleration of 10 km per hour per second. If the player's inventory mass is over 1 ton, this maximum speed and acceleration will decrease with the formula of base speed or acceleration divided by 1 plus mass in tons divided by 10. Expression on screen. The jetpack will have the same limits as standard atmospheric engines, requiring 0.5 liters of nitron fuel a second. The reason for the rate of nitron is the following. Assuming you are 30 kilometers away from a destination, how long would it take with your jetpack to fly there? For an upgraded jetpack, 7.5 minutes, and for a standard jetpack, 11.25 minutes. The rate works well for the interval most likely necessary to refuel from surface rocks without being too tedious. As this is DU, we must also consider talent alongside our changes to player movement. The jetpack jump talent will be replaced with the stamina bar talent, of which for each level grants 6 more seconds to the stamina bar's capacity. More simply, however, the jetpack sprint talent would be translated into the flying jetpack's maximum speed. This would increase the maximum possible speed to 240 km per hour at level 5. Along with the changes to sprinting, major alterations to rock mining are in order. First, their frequency on the ground makes the ground absolutely hideous. Additionally, with a slower sprint, the player will not be able to grab the smaller rocks as easily. Instead, boulders containing 250 liters of ore will replace the old rocks with a frequency 10 times less than the previous rocks. Calibration bonuses remain unchanged. Since we're already trying to improve rock mining, let's also change how the utterly boring let's stare at one spot mining mechanic works. To positively construct upon the old rock mining, a new weak spot mining mechanic similar to the one Rust has is added. Each rock has a randomized number of these spots to generate based on their tier and ore volume. Tier times ore contained in liters divided by 50 with small deviation. If the output is less than 1, no spots will appear. Assuming otherwise, a glowing spot will appear on the rock when holding the harvest tool and takes 1 second to mine normally. We'll get back to that. Afterward, until the number of spots is exhausted, another spot will appear on the rock when the previous was mined, in a random position. The only sign the spots will not appear is on the bottom, so that the puzzle cannot become stuck. Breaking the last spot in the sequence destroys the rock, yielding the ore contained. But wait, there's more. The second mechanic to spice up the breaking of rocks is with a little bit of RNG. Upon mining a rock using the spot breaking mechanic only, there's a 1 divided by 10 times tier chance, expression on screen, for example 1 divided by 50 for tier 5, that this new mechanic will trigger. Cracked up in rock, visually consistent with the original prop, will replace the mined rock. A small geode inside the rock around the center will appear, mineable like the old mechanic. Upon mining the geode, it will grant the player 5% of the original rock's ore volume as a different type of the same tier ore. For example, a 250 liter boulder of hematite could spawn a geode of bauxite, which contains 12.5 liters. To help this merge with the old boring mining mechanic, a few things need to be mentioned about it. First, the spot mechanic does not influence the mining time of the rock using the old method. Second, geodes never create spots, however this should be easily accounted for by the spot mechanic's limits already. Third, both the spot and old mining mechanics will be influenced by the mining optimizations talent, such that each spot takes at maximum level 0.75 seconds to mine, and the old method's timer is multiplied by 3/4. The third extra mechanic relates to the harvesting tool's overlay. When holding a rock harvesting tool, a scanner pulse effect the same as the normal mining scanner will turn any rock it finds in its path on for 3 seconds, where afterwards the brightness on the rocks will fade. This mechanic would replace the persistent glowing effect of rocks currently, making the landscape much less like a psychedelic hellscape. These 3 mechanics are a great way to flesh out the rock mining mechanic, but there is more to make the early game more interactive. There has been an issue since over a year ago with the progression system, which was seemingly ignored when I attempt to discuss it. This is of course the issue of territory units versus the progression system, the problem being the following. To progress from using a nanocrafter to actually using industry, the player must obtain a static core as well as an actually claimed territory, and therefore a territory unit in order to start manufacturing. The issue being in order to get a territory unit, the player must have already had a static core placed due to the fact that a territory unit requires tier 2 materials. This gets to the simplified explanation that in order to place a static core, you need a territory unit, but in order to get a territory unit, you need a static core to craft it. Here's some common solutions to fix the issue that I have major issues with. First, the most frequent response to me bringing this up was that the Sanctuary Territory Unit can be used as a territory unit to manufacture, but here's the issue. We must assume in order to maintain a coherent starting point in the game that the starting gameplay cannot rely on other game elements, example, Sanctuary Territory Unit. This is due to the fact that after the initial start of any game, it is always possible to end up back in a starting position, however, without the starting items from the first time. This is primarily what Axiom 5 is telling us, however, additionally, this choppy solution ties to the next one. Some people suggest that you don't need a territory unit, the fact that you can just make a space station instead. While this isn't entirely false, it breaks Axiom 6 in its very long entirety due to the simple fact. In order to get to space to make a space core possible, the player must obtain Kurgon fuel, which in itself is only craftable by industry. This is similar to the Sanctuary Territory argument, as the player can get stranded on a planet without Kurgon fuel to get back to their Sanctuary Territory unit to do industry, thus becoming stuck in the far reaches of space. In my opinion, these arguments are quite silly, as there is a way to fix the issue I presented and balance it properly such that everyone should be happy. Here's the best option. Let's create a new item called the Provisional Territory Unit, which is sort of like the Sanctuary Territory Unit. It can be crafted with simply 50 basic fixations, 2M basic power transformers, 2M basic standard frames, and 50 basic processors, taking 1 hour to craft. This special territory unit has a few properties that make it a good alternative for some, but definitely not better than a standard territory unit. First, it is unsellable in markets and also completely soulbound to the player that crafts it. Attempting to place another person's provisional territory unit or trying to place a second one in the game world will fail to work. The latter will tell you that you're required to abandon your old provisional territory and replace a new one. They will require no taxes and will appear silent on the map to the owner to be easier to distinguish. These territories, due to being beginner territories, will not allow any industry above size M to be placed or run, including mining units, and in the future would still require power to run any industry as well, assuming normal territory units require it. The point of these territories is to help the early game player properly progress but not affect the market of territories in a general sense. Due to their cheap nature, provisional territories would work as well for people who like to build off-world rather than being confined to just the sanctuary moon. Well, that's all I've got for today. I firmly believe that all of these changes will be greatly beneficial for the game. Stay tuned for the next one where I'll be talking about hover vessels versus literally everything else, and in a later video about industry. Until then, I'll catch you later.